Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. Today's episode is an after action report for the battle report that I published this weekend, and that was using the new leaked guard codex. Now if you haven't seen that battle report yet, I would strongly recommend you watch it first, because obviously there's going to be lots of spoilers in this video for what happened in that game. But don't worry, if you don't know where to find it, there'll be a link at the end of this video, so you can just skip ahead, it'll pop up with the suggested next video, and it'll be right there. So go and check out that video first, and then come back and watch this one. Now, what I want to do with today's episode is just go through some first impressions, some thoughts, and some feelings of the new Guard Codex. Now, to be clear, the version that I played with was the playtester version, and this information is about a year out of date, so many things may have changed with the final codex that hits the shelves. But what I did like was that I was able to use this playtester version to get a feel for how Games Workshop wanted the Guard to play in general, what direction they were pushing the faction in. Now, I'm sure that many of these things will have changed or been toned down when the final product hits the shelves, but it still gives me that good idea of how the Guard should play when we do finally get the full proper release. Now, I've thrown up on the screen here a few of my top points that I want to make in this video, but there are many other small ones that I'm going to be discussing throughout the episode. Now, one of the first things that I want to talk about is not the battle itself, but actually the list building for the battle report. And it actually felt very different when I was putting my guard army together. Normally, when I'm putting a guard list together, the first thing that goes on the top of every list is 3 tank commanders. I never leave home without them. But in this game, I actually only took 1 tank commander. And I, for the first time in a very long time, took regular Leman Russes. And that didn't feel like I was handicapping myself. In fact, I didn't really feel like I needed more than 1 Leman Russ tank commander. Now, that was because one of the warlord traits that I'd taken was superior tactical training, which allowed one of my officers to do an order type they wouldn't normally know. So I actually had 1 tank commander, but I had 1 Castellan who could also do 1 tank order a turn. I think if I was to do that list again and I didn't have that warlord trait, I would feel more comfortable taking 2 tank commanders. I think 1 is slightly too much of a liability because, of course, you've got things like inflexible command, which rely on you being able to have your vehicles near a tank commander. If my opponent had had more long-range firepower and had been able to pick off my tank commander from a distance, it would have meant that I would have scored a lot less secondary points. So first thing that I noticed was I didn't need 3 tank commanders at all. My firepower felt sufficient without 3 tank commanders, which is the first time it's felt like that in literally years. But I definitely still think you're going to want at least 2 tank commanders, or yeah, basically 2 tank commanders, so that you can do your inflexible command a little bit more securely. But in terms of the actual tank commander itself, I didn't really need more than 2 sources of tank orders, because tank orders now splash, and that was really powerful. The ability to be able to put a tank on an order on 1 tank and then for it to go out to pretty much all the other ones was really powerful. So I definitely like that now tank orders have got a 12-inch range. That felt good. That 12-inch range felt really good, and it also meant that it felt that I could move around my vehicles a bit more and still keep my inflexible command going. So overall, just the extra range of the tank orders and the splash in tank orders felt really good. And because of that, well, and I sort of knew that would be the case when I was building the list and I was doing my research, but because of that, yeah, the list building was very different. Like I said, there was no 3 tank commanders top of the list. It was the first time that I've run less than 3 tank commanders in a serious list in a very long time. After that, the main list building elements were very similar. I had officers still, and I had loads of infantry. And again, I still think even in this new codex, I still think that 100 infantry is going to be the minimum. I actually felt like I could have done with a couple more infantry squads. If you actually go and look at that battle report, I only had 10 infantry squads, well, 10 Cadence shock troop squads, I should say. And by the end of the game, I was down to like 1. That's not a comfortable position to be in. And if I'd been against an opponent that had the ability to smash me for 1 more turn, that would have been a big problem. For example, if those Death Company had made their Forlorn Fury charge, yeah, definitely 10 infantry squads wouldn't have been enough. So in my mind, despite the fact that some aspects of the list building has changed, if you're running a hybrid guard list, it still very much feels like you're going to need your 100 to 120 infantry minimum. One other thing list building that stood out to me, this is sort of the last list building point I want to make, was the command squads. Now, for a long time, guard players have been asking for command squads and commanders to be joined back together. And it was really good to see that in the playtester version. It's been good to see that in some of the leaks as well. But what I would say is it's actually a double-edged sword. It feels good, but the fact that the command squads, in at least in the playtester version, were priced at 80 points made them feel very expensive. I know that you can add advisors onto the command squads, but quite frankly, I couldn't feel like I could justify it in my list building process. I mean, I didn't need a master of ordnance, to be fair. I didn't have the artillery. I didn't need Officer of the Fleet either. The Astropath might have been nice, but I didn't need it. But even if I had needed those things, the fact that those characters are now 40 points each to be added onto a command squad just felt very, very restrictive. So the command squads felt great and they looked cool. And let me tell you, from just a gameplay and just fun and just awesomeness and what just felt right, just a right feeling. Having those command squads running around the battlefield as one unit led by an officer just looked epic. It just felt right. Fundamentally, it felt right. But from a list building point of view, an 80-point command squad was very expensive. And that's 30 points more than what we're paying now. So that's as many points essentially as if you took Creed and a command squad right now, roughly. So it definitely felt restrictive, and I feel that was a bit of a shame. I think if you realistically, they probably need to be a little bit cheaper. The one order was great. The Voxcast was great. The reroll ones to wound with the flag was great, but they did feel a little bit more expensive. I think that either the advisor cost needs to come down, or the command squad itself needs to be about 10 points cheaper. But overall, it was a great unit to use. One other thing I want to mention is the list itself. I know some people are going to scratch their heads when they see some of the options that I took and go, that's a bit of a random concoction of a list. It was, outside of the 100 infantry, it very much was a bit of a hodgepodge, a bit of a smorgasbord. And the reason I did that was I wanted to get a feel for as many new things as possible. But I didn't want to be taking units that I wasn't 100% certain on. So I know some people would ask me, did you want to proxy a Rogal Dawn? Why didn't you use a Rogal Dawn? I don't have a Rogal Dawn model, and I don't want to proxy anything like that. So the approach that I took with the list was, let's show off the updated profiles for as many of those classic guard units as possible. So a lot of people really love the Hellhound and the Hellhound variants, right? Let's get a couple of those in the list. A lot of people have a soft spot for the Hydra. Hell, when was the last time we saw Hydra in the battlefield? Let's get one of those on the list. When was the last time we saw Vanquisher cannons? Let's put those in. So that was my thought process behind the list. And I would say it was barely an optimized list at all, and it still did very, very well. However, what I think is going to be really important is not to judge 9th edition guard lists by 8th edition standards. I think that if that had been an 8th edition list, it would have been terrible. I would have had to concede by turn 2 easily. There's no doubt about it. But I think 9th edition guard lists are going to feel very different to 8th edition guard lists, especially hybrid ones. I think you are going to see more of one unit being taken. I think you are going to see more tools in the toolbox. I think, of course, there's always going to be that propensity to be like, okay, well, if one Leman Russ is good, I'll take 7. If one artillery piece is good, I'll take 6. Yeah, I think that's still very much appropriate to build a classic guard list. But I think there's now much greater scope in the 9th edition Codex to be able to take lots of little tools in the toolbox. And I think that's going to be a really fun experience for both a lot of guard players. It's going to feel very fresh. It felt very fresh when I was building the list. I don't think it's going to feel really good for players coming from other factions coming in. One of the big hurdles that I see with newer players coming in to 40k and picking guards the first faction, or veteran players coming from, let's say, Space Marines and coming into guard, is they have this approach of, I'll take one of this and one of this and one of that, because especially if you're a veteran player or like a Space Marine player, you're not used to having to take 3 of the same unit to achieve one job. I mean, there's an old saying in the guard, you've got to take 3 units of the same type, because the first unit's going to fail, the second unit's going to run away, and the third unit's actually going to achieve the job. And you just don't have that kind of mentality with a lot of other factions. And so I've seen a lot of Space Marine to guard lists, Space Marine play to guard lists, and they have this, oh, well, I'll just take 1 unit of Scions because that's all I need, right? It's like, no, you need like 3 units of Scions if you're trying to achieve that mission with those Scions. However, I think under the 9th edition Codex, that won't be so much of a problem anymore. I think you can take this very varied list and it will perform it would perform well enough. So moving on to the game itself, one of the first things that stood out to me was how familiar my deployment felt. It was very much infantry at front, vehicles at back. I know that the turret weapon rule allows us to shoot out of combat with our turrets, but what I found was that that wasn't actually a great buff. You know, maybe if I was running all tanks, that'd be fine. But just because the tank that's tied up can shoot out doesn't mean you don't want to fall back with that tank. When turn 2 came around and those Sangard just blitzed through my lines and tagged my executioner, I had a big debate of, oh, do I just leave it in there? And I realized, no, I don't want to leave it in there because, yeah, sure, the executioner can shoot out, but no one can clear that big 9-man squad of Sangard whilst it's tied up. So whilst I think that turret weapon is a cool rule, I actually think the whole being in combat and shooting out is going to come up very little because you're going to want to be able to deal with that unit that is tagging the vehicle, especially if it's a powerful one. If it's a few grots, who cares? But if it's a big Death Star unit, you don't want to stay in combat. You want to pull back and then kill the Death Star. Now, I don't want to go through a blow-by-blow of each turn. I mean, you can literally watch the battle report for that. That wouldn't be helpful. What I want to do here is just talk about some things that jumped out to me, some of those highlights that I really noticed whilst playing the game. And the first thing that I want to talk about is my long-range damage. It felt so much better having proper long-range damage output. I know currently in 8th we've got artillery and that, you know, the flat damage 3 that can do some stuff, but I've always said that unless you really mass and concentrate your artillery, it doesn't actually do a huge amount of damage. I mean, I've done a whole series on, you know, the fundamentals of using artillery and where I talk about that. But what I found was having those Vanquisher cannons felt so good. Just being able to be like, okay, I don't have a demolisher cannon that's got at best like a 30-inch range with, you know, gunnery experts and spot details and that kind of stuff. I didn't have to worry about that. It was like, oh, if I can see it, I'm in range of it. And that was really, really strong. So having long range firepower on my Lehman Rusters again just felt so good. It made me realize how restrictive it felt, like, you know, Goku with the chains on. We know when I've been trying to use these demolishers to win long range firepower, it's just not, it's actually been harder than we think. And so it was so good just to be able to, like, yep, my long range firepower, that's doing the damage. Speaking of long range firepower, you know, mentioning the Vanquishers, they just felt really, really good. They did not feel overpowered though. That was the interesting thing. Yeah, I mean, 2 Vanquisher tanks fired at a Redemptor Dreadnought and it was still around. It actually took a tank commander, a regular Lehman Russ, and 3 Sentinels all firing at a Redemptor to kill it. And that was good. The Redemptor didn't feel anywhere near as tough as it has done in the past, but the Vanquisher felt strong but not overpowered. I think with the Vanquisher, what I learned very, very quickly, it was about what target you shot it at. Yes, if you go over that game and look at it, it'll seem like the Vanquisher is sweeping all before it, but it's not. I'm just being very careful what I'm choosing to shoot it at. So, for example, I shot it at the Redemptor Dreadnought, which allowed me to do 10 wounds to it in one go. Okay. And then I shot it at some Sanguinary Guard. Now, if you actually look at when I fire like a Vanquisher, a full unit Sanguinary Guard, I only kill like 1 or 2 of them. But when I combine the firepower of 2 Vanquishers at a unit of Blade Guard, it felt like, oh my god, I just wiped out a unit of Blade Guard with 2 Vanquish tanks. Yeah, but it took 2 Vanquishers. They only actually killed 2 models a turn. So what I've realized is that the Vanquisher is a very, very strong unit, but it must be used at hyper elite stuff or vehicles. If I was trying to shoot that thing into anything that had more than 5 or 6 blokes in it, if I was trying to shoot even a standard squad of something, it just would not have done the same amount of damage. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the Cadence Shock Troopers. They were really, really good. For me, guys, honestly, it's Cadence Shock Troopers all the way. I know that a lot of people will be diehard and they will stick to their infantry squad with special and heavy weapon. Honestly, you're just handicapping yourself. You really just want to be going for those double special weapons. Your tanks will do the long range firepower. Your infantry with those 2 special weapons, it's just so powerful, especially when you combine it with take aim. And take aim is really the key here, guys. I think if take aim was to get toned down in the final version of the Codex, it would have to lose its extra AP value. But I think if they took away the +1 to hit, it would just become not very good at all. I don't need the extra AP. I'd rather have the +1 to hit. So it'd be kind of cool to see how that works out. But for me, take aim plus double special weapons on infantry squads was just eye-opening. And what it really made me realize was that pure infantry is still very much on the table. I had 3 units of infantry pick up a unit of Death Company just with special weapons. It was bonkers. It was genuinely bonkers. So for me, I know leading up to this battle, I've been saying, oh, I don't think pure infantry is really going to be the main way to go. I don't think I could have been more wrong. I think pure infantry, if you took 18 squads of Caden shock troopers, you gave them all double plasma or double melter, you gave all the sergeants, plasma pistols, you throw in some Kazakin and some other, and maybe some scions and whatnot, you get yourself up to like 200 infantry, and they're all hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, wounding, enemy infantry on 2s, rerolling 1s. My God, like, it's so powerful. So powerful. So all I can say, guys, is pure infantry is back on the menu, boys. Now, speaking of those reroll auras, there's a large section of the community that think that Imperial Guard orders are bullshit. Oh, how come you can do all these special effects? Oh, it's so unfair. You should get auras like everyone else. And I have maintained for a very, very long time that if you want to give the Guard community reroll auras like everyone else, that is going to be something that you regret very, very quickly. And all I can say is I was right. Not to come across as big-headed or arrogant, guys, but honestly, having reroll auras was just insane. I know a lot of other armies have it and are used to it, and they think it's like a standard mechanic. You've got to understand, for the last 5 years, Guard haven't had any real source of reroll auras. Yeah, you had like Harker and Yarrick, but they're expensive and they're limited to certain regiments. Having the Castellan run around giving out a reroll once to hit aura was, quite frankly, so much of a force multiplier. It blew my mind. I didn't think it was going to be as big a deal because obviously I've got Marines, I've got reroll auras, but having it on Guard, it just felt, again, it felt like the chains were coming off. It just felt right. And again, having that reroll 1s to wound aura on the banner, again, just felt so right. It felt so right. And so for me, having both auras and orders, it really opened my eyes to how good the Guard infantry is going to be, and it really made me understand the approach GW had with the infantry datasheets. The infantry datasheets themselves aren't much to write home about. It's what you can do to buff them up that makes them so scary. So I think one of the funny things that's going to happen is a lot of people are going to start crying bullshit about Guard infantry when the final codex drops, assuming that we get to keep reroll 1s to hit auras, reroll 1s to wound auras, and also take aim gives us +1 to hit. Now, one thing that was a really big shakeup, big surprise, bigger than I thought it was going to be, was the complete reversal of how Guard movement works in the new codex. So under the current Codex, the tanks move very, very slowly because you want to use grinding advance, and so you never move more than 5 inches unless you absolutely have to. And the infantry is sprinting all over the place, running 24 inches with move if you get a couple of lucky dice rolls. What the new Codex felt like was the total opposite of that. My infantry at best were going 14 inches. If they were going through some dense terrain, that went down to 12 inches. And so when I was first reading move in the playtester version, I was like, oh, well, it's cool that it's now a fixed value, but what you've got to remember is under the old system, you've got to move twice and make 2 advance rolls, which meant the minimum distance you move was 14. You could probably move much further than that. Whereas now, under the new way of doing it, the maximum you can move is 14. So the old minimum is the new maximum. So my infantry still felt movable, but they were nowhere near as fast as they used to be. On the flip side, the tanks felt fucking fast. Sorry, cover your children's ears, but they felt really fast. One of the things that really hammered it home for me was when I was obviously, me and Scholar were setting up the game, and he was, we were deploying, and he was like, okay, so yeah, my unit should be safe there. You shouldn't be able to get any angles on me with your tanks. And I was like, no, I'll just move 10 inches and shoot you. And he was like, oh yeah, of course, you don't have grinding advance anymore. I was like, yeah. And so he actually had to, if you look, he had to really deploy much further back. He couldn't just like deploy, forward a bit and cover himself from most of the firepower of the central ruins, because I would have just got angles on him straight away. And it feels right. The infantry shouldn't be sprinting past tanks. The tanks should feel faster than the infantry, and they now do. So that felt very, very different, but it felt very, very right. I think one other thing that I want to mention is how well balanced all the units felt. Nothing Truly nothing felt overpowered or broken. Everything just felt usable and good. And I think Ogren were a really good example of this. The Ogren were able to do some shooting. They were about as good as they've always been in combat, but they just felt a bit tougher with that -1 damage. They just felt like they could actually do some damage themselves with the Ripper guns. It just felt good. And now when you compare Ogrins to Bullgrins, it feels like Bullgrins have got worse, but they haven't. Bullgrins are just as good as they always have been. And Ogrins now are a viable choice. It comes down to player preference. Do you want to be able to bop people on the head, or do you want to hit them with those big auto shotguns? And so I feel, honestly, like the Codex felt very well internally balanced. There were some things that were better than others, but there was nothing that just felt turbo bad. Nothing. All right. And I think what it reminded me of, but not in an overpowered and broken kind of way, was the Dark Elder Codex. Obviously, Dark Elder were very, very powerful when they came out, but one of the things that I felt made them very powerful that people didn't really talk about was the Codex was very strong internally. So if GW nerfed Witches, people just switched into Cabalites. When GW nerfed Cabalites, people just switched into Covenants. And I feel like the same might be said for the Guard Codex. I don't think there's anything that's going to be broken or bullshit, but I think, there's always going to be some combos I haven't thought of that some top tier, big wrinkly brain guy is going to be able to work out. But what it felt with me was if they change anything, there'll be plenty of other options. There's not one crutch. They won't just kick the legs out from under the Codex. It didn't feel like an AdMech Codex. One last unit that I want to give a shout out to was the Kazakin. I really, really enjoyed using the Kazakin, and I think that they're going to be. I think 2 squads of Kazakin are going to become fundamental to a lot of guard lists. For me, the one that I had with the Barbican's Key felt very nice. It just had that in the bag. It felt like I had a deep strike that I could pull off turn 4, turn 5. I didn't need to get everything in by turn 2 and 3. So that was really, really good. Having the mix of special weapons wasn't anywhere near as bad as I thought it was going to be, because I've got 2 Melter, 2 Plasma, a Plasma Pistol, and a Hot Shot Sniper Rifle. So that's actually, yes, it's a bit of a mix, but there's a lot of firepower there. And the end result is you do lots of damage output. So having the mixed weapons didn't feel anywhere near as bad as I thought it was going to be, and I'm really excited to report that back to the Guard community. Now, interestingly, I know the Barbican's Key seems like a really obvious relic to be able to give your Kazakin Sergeant, but do you know what really stood out to me, what I was really thinking about the whole time? How good it would have been to have my Kazakin squad with the Relic Pistol, with the Emperor's Fury, because that would essentially have given me an extra plasma gun and a half at close range, because the Emperor's Fury is 3 shots of strength 8 AP minus 3 flat 2 damage. You combine that with the other 2 plasma guns I have in the squad, that's 7 shots hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, wounding Marines on 2s, rerolling 1s, thanks to Castellan and the command squad. Then you've got the 2 melter guns which come in there as well. Suddenly you're up to 9 shots, which are doing all that stuff. And it just felt really like if I'd had that Relic Plasma Pistol, I would have been cleaning house left, right, and center. So it just felt, the Kazakin felt very, very strong. And I think it's interesting. I think they're going to be a really good target for some of the relic weapons that you've got in the Codex. So yeah, overall, those are the main things that really jumped out to me. The real positives, things that were making me go, wow, I am loving the feel of this Codex. And that's the main thing I want to get across is I really loved the feel of the Codex. Okay, it felt fresh and exciting and new. And there was a concern, and one that I had as well, about getting a new Codex. I was so familiar with the old one. I was like, oh, I don't know if I want a new Codex anymore. It's not going to be as good. Honestly, we've all just forgotten how nice it feels. All of us longbeards, how nice it feels just to get that nice, fresh Codex. Honestly, it felt so just nice and exciting and fresh. It felt good, guys. So those of you that are concerned about the new Codex coming in, truly I wouldn't be. It felt, I know we're all set in our ways, we're guard players, we know what we like and we like what we know, but trust me, you'll get your hands on that Codex the first time, you'll start using it, and once you've had time to digest the new way that it feels, you're going to love it. I just guarantee you're going to love it. A couple of things that stood out to me that weren't as good as I thought they were going to be. I felt like the Hydra, the Devil Dog, and the Hellhound were all usable, but despite the fact they've had some pretty good improvements, they weren't broken in any way, shape, or form. The Hydra was like the Ogrins. It went from being unusable to just, oh, actually all right. And I think maybe that gave me some higher expectations for it than I thought it was going to have, because I thought it was going to be I thought spamming Hydra was going to be great. At the end of the day, guys, it's just got some good autocannons, so at least the autocannons are now, again, usable. That's the key word, I'd say. Every unit in the Codex felt usable. Every single one. Some of them were better than others, but all of them felt like you could plug them into a list and you wouldn't be handicapping yourself. And let me tell you, that is not something you can say about the current 8th edition Codex. The 8th edition Codex we've got at the moment has a few viable builds, and if you don't stick to them, you're just going to get smashed. I felt with the current guard codex, you could have a real good variety of guard lists, and all of them and all of the players would be having a great time. But that's all we've got time for today. Let me know your thoughts down in that comment section below. Is there anything that you're really excited to see that I didn't use in the battle report? Let me know, and if I get a chance to do another one before the guard codex drops, I'll make sure to try and include those units. If you enjoyed today's video, please make sure to smash that like button like it's your sororitas girlfriend, and if you want to make sure you never miss an episode, then click the subscribe button. If you really enjoyed today's episode and you want to see more videos like this, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It's thanks to the channel members and Patreon supporters that I'm able to do this gig full time, and you get loads and loads of perks for being both a channel member and or a Patreon supporter. But one of the ones that you do get for being either or is access to the Mordian Glory Discord. So don't worry, you don't need to be Patreon and channel member to get access to Discord. If you just want to use one or the other, you can get on over into that Discord channel, and it's a really, really active community. We've got over 500 active members in there at the moment. It's constantly bustling. There's always something to talk about. You've got showcases for models, painting tips, tactics, all that kind of good stuff, memes, general 40k, and you know what? It's not just guard content as well. Like, we've had loads and loads of other people from other communities coming in and really providing quite a lot of variety to the conversations that we're having. So it's really, really good. So if that sounds fun, consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. And I just want to take a moment to say a big thank you to the latest channel members and Patreon supporters. So a huge thank you to Lewis Cleveland, Lucas Munez Gonzalez, James Roberts, Matt Small, It's For My, David Ewing, Travis McHenry, Michael Wolf, Matt Triplet, Donny Rose, 2310 Luke, James Barron, Will K, Lambo UK, Night of Dawn, Damnation, Fireside Stories, Troy Jernigan, Timmer1996, and Robbie Death Spectre. Thank you all for becoming channel members. Thank you for doing your part. And of course, I want to say a big thank you to the latest Patreons as well. So thank you to Andrew, Anthony, Robert, Fool's Fate, Owen, Malice in Wonderland, Siri, James Hughes, Stephen Page, Matty B, and Sean Mulligan. Thank you guys for becoming channel members. I really appreciate your ongoing Patreon support. Now, last but certainly not least, I want to say a massive thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people that have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty when it comes to supporting the channel. So I want to say a personal, heartfelt thank you to Bon Vert, Navy Veteran, Philip French, Ross Miller, Tequal, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nicholas Walsh, Swordfish Trombone, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and of course, August Varney. Thank you guys. Your generous Patreon support truly makes a huge, huge difference. So once again, thank you so much. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching. And of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.